So the good news is that we really are like kids in a candy store, and we have a ton of data to play with. The bad news is what do you do with all of this data? There's a lot out there. And then the other piece of great news is that we've never been so close to today's consumers. So being able, through these devices, through the internet, to track consumers every single day by day, even minute by minute. So, I recently read an article in Forbes where it was a summary of 2014 sort of big data initiatives. Last year, an average of $8 million was spent to increase data assets. 76% of companies even mentioned that in 2015, they were going to invest in more data assets. And by investing more, meaning actually buying more data to sort of append to their existing transactional or CRM or linear data. I'm going to turn it over to the panel for the first question. So I think big data is not a new concept whatsoever. It originated, academics call it meta-analysis data. Enterprise companies and financial institutions use a ton of it, right? And they create BI platforms from it. But in the media space, I think big data has a very different terminology depending on who you talk to. So what is big data to you? Maybe I'll start with the true data scientist.
There is a definition, I would start with this. There is a definition out there you may have read about big data. And this guy basically, and I think it gives an idea on how people feels about this big data phenomenon. Basically, this guy said big data is a lot like teenage sex. Why? Because everybody talks about it, nobody really knows how to do it, and everybody thinks everybody else is doing it. So everybody claims he's doing it. I think. Now, obviously, I don't agree with that definition. Sometimes I wish big data was like teenage sex, but I'm joking. So anyway, I mean, big data, obviously, it's a lot of data. But to me, big data, you start to have big data when you basically have enough data points that you start really capturing the behavior of your respondent, of your audience in entirety. So obviously, that depends on the business area that you're interested in. So for example, in my case, there would be linear TV, online streaming, social media, maybe even purchasing behavior. So when I start having enough data points that capture all of that, then I can say that I'm having big data. Especially because, in statistics, when you have a lot of variables, the number of observation that you need has to increase to ensure you have enough variability in the data set. So the more variables you have, the more respondents you need. So that grows exponentially, right? So, and obviously, there are other factors. I don't want to talk too much, but basically, also that big data needs to have a big impact. So, if I have big data, but I don't do anything, I mean, I cannot scale it and really have an impact on the business then. Mm-hmm. So it really goes hands in hands with advanced analytics. Mm-hmm. So if I have big data, I really need to, because it would be a pity, right? If you analyze big data with traditional reporting methodology, then it would be a waste. So big data, big advanced analytics.
Great answer. Yeah. I think everyone might steal your teenage sex analogy.
Yeah, it's not mine. It's not mine.
So Mike, coming from Google, you actually have a ton of data to play with because Google is probably one of the most widely search engines used that people use on an hourly basis. So talk to us about what you do at Google, how you manage to sort of capture all of that data, make it meaningful, and what you do with it in your role.
Sounds good. So I work with large advertisers. So I sit between product management and research, and work with our largest advertisers to figure out, how can they make their brand advertising build their brand online, and how do they know that they're doing this well with consumers, and how can we generate insights to understand what the consumer journey looks like and where they can actually intervene and influence people. At Google, we have a couple things that we need to balance, very carefully. The first piece is, what is our consumer experience like? So people are using search, people are using maps, YouTube, Android. We look at the user first, and then after that, how do we actually, intervene with our advertisers so that they can be there for the moments that matter when people are using our products. And so with that comes a lot of expectations from both consumers and also from our advertisers. So the more big data that you have, the more context that you have for how people use devices. So if anyone has an Android phone, you've probably played around with Google Now, you've probably played with Google Maps. When you have these things come up, there's a ton of data that enables those experiences. But as those experiences get better, you have a lot of expectations, both from having accountable advertising and also from the experience of the user. So when I think about big data, there's a few things that come to my mind. The first is accessibility. So the barriers for actually working with this data are going down. Originally, back in the day, we had actuaries and universities and governments that had reams and reams of data, but it wasn't accessible to non-specialists. But in my office, and I think it's probably the model for where a lot of digital advertising and the rest of the industry is going, is you have everyone from salespeople down to data scientists that have access to usable forms of big data. So huge pieces, accessibility and applicability, and then the expectation piece is, how do we actually enable really great experiences now that everyone knows that context is there and all this data is there for us to help build brands and also have people use Google products and have a really great time with them.
Yeah, great point.
I'm actually picking up on kind of a theme between Fabio and Mike where, well, first of all, for me, I work on the content side, so I really don't delineate between big data and small data. It's just information that helps me do my job. But in terms of what you guys were kind of talking about, I think when I think of big data, I think kind of the key ingredient is diversity of data, right? In terms of two fronts. One is sort of the data set itself. Is it capturing all the sort of behaviors and attributes that we need to create meaningful insights? And secondly, how sort of differentiated is that data set from the information we operate with on a day-to-day, right? And sort of the greater the sort of degree of separation, sort of the better the results, in my opinion. I've only been involved in sort of a few like textbook, big data projects, but in my experience, those are the ones that shed sort of the best insights. And so what I look for is, I'm not impressed by size or amount of information. I look for quality of information and then the diversity of the set of that information, how unique it is from the day-to-day sort of behavioral type. We work in a ratings world for the most part, and how different is that from that? I'm looking for tonal information, stuff that speaks to motivation, sentiment, and if I can correlate that with performance, that's huge.
Yeah, yeah. Sandy?
On the TV side in general, we have been dealing with big data for a very long time, right? I mean, we recent in, I guess, 10 years, received respondent level data, and that was big data. So in the last few years, as big data had this larger sort of topic and observation, it didn't scare us in TV because we were using big data all the time. We had a lot of big data. And the hard part remains cobbling together those findings and giving the context to the big data that allows us to deliver our advertisers the right target audience and internally finding the right target audience for future program development. So really in big data for us is using all of the different sources, whether it's set-top box data, Nielsen viewing behavior data, online data, getting it all in one place, getting as much competitive context as we possibly can to then bring insights to our individual viewers.